You smell it before you see it. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a happy accident of building design. In a very large number of supermarkets in this country, the bakery is positioned so that the warm air coming off it reaches you at or near the entrance, and the layout of the store is arranged so that you walk toward the source of that smell rather than away from it. Warm bread is one of the most reliably powerful scent triggers in retail, and it has been used deliberately for decades. That part is not a secret. Ask anyone who has worked in store planning. So you follow it. And you arrive at a counter, and there are wooden effect trays and paper bags on a spike, and tongs and a sign. And the sign says something like freshly baked in store, or baked fresh daily, or baked right here, or oven baked in store today. Now here is the thing I need you to understand before we go any further, because it changes the entire complexion of this video. 7 of the 10 largest supermarket chains in the United Kingdom have been formally complained about to trading standards over precisely those claims. Not by me. Not by an anonymous blog. By a campaign group that went out, gathered the wording, photographed the signage, worked out what was actually happening behind the counter, and filed complaints with named local authorities on specific dates. I have those names and those dates, and I am going to read all of them out. And I am going to explain what is actually going on in that back room, because it does happen. Something is genuinely going into an oven. Heat is genuinely being applied. Nobody's lying about the oven. They are lying about the word baked. There is also a second thing in today's video that I think is bigger than the bread, and I want you to hold on to it. There exists a category of substance that goes into a very large proportion of British bread that is deliberately added by the manufacturer, that remains in the finished loaf in at least some cases, and that is legally exempt from appearing on the ingredients list. Not hidden in small print. Exempt. It does not have to be there at all. I will tell you what that category is called, why the exemption exists, and the part that genuinely surprised me, who gets to decide whether a given substance qualifies for it. So let's start with what is actually behind that counter. The industry term is bake-off. The Real Bread campaign, who have done more work on this than anyone, call these operations loaf tanning salons, and once you have heard that phrase, you will never see an in-store bakery the same way again. Here is how it works. A bread product, a baguette, a bloomer, a pain au chocolat, a tiger loaf is made in a factory, somewhere else. Possibly in another county, possibly in another country. In that factory, it is mixed, kneaded, proved, shaped, and then in most cases partially baked. The structure is set. The crumb is formed. The loaf, in every meaningful sense, is made. Then it is frozen. It sits frozen. It is transported frozen. It arrives at the supermarket frozen, in a cardboard case on a pallet, exactly like any other frozen good. And at some point on the morning you happen to walk in, a member of staff takes it out, puts it on a tray, and puts the tray in an oven at the back of the shop for a short period, long enough to drive off the frost, brown the crust, and produce that smell. That is the entire operation. It is not baking. It is finishing. It is the last 4% of a process that happened somewhere else, weeks or months earlier, applied on the premises so that a sign can lawfully-ish say something about an oven. And I want to be fair to the people doing it, because they are not the villains of this story. The colleague loading that tray at 5 in the morning did not write the sign. They are working a shift in a shop, operating equipment they were trained on in an afternoon, and in many stores the bakery role has been cut back or absorbed into general duties, precisely because the model no longer requires a baker. That is the actual consequence of bake-off. It did not just change what is on the counter, it removed the job of the person who used to stand behind it. A skilled trade was engineered out of the building, and then the building kept the word. And the campaign's investigation found something I found genuinely startling about how long that gap can be. Some of these frozen products have potentially up to 2 years between manufacture and rebaking. 2 years? A loaf described to you as freshly baked today could have been made before the previous general election. I want to be precise. That is the outer end of the range, not the average, and it will not be true of everything on that counter. But it is the documented outer end, and the point stands. Nothing on that sign, on that shelf edge, or on that paper bag distinguishes between a product finished in the oven 6 hours after it was made and one finished 2 years after it was made. The word today is doing an enormous amount of work, and it is describing the reheating, not the making. Now let me read you the list, because the specifics are what make this real. As of the summer of 2024, complaints had been lodged with trading standards authorities about 7 of Britain's 10 largest grocers. Tesco to Hertfordshire County Council on the 28th of May 2024. Sainsbury's to Oxfordshire County Council on the 10th of June. Asda to West Yorkshire Joint Services on the 3rd of July. Morrison's also to West Yorkshire on the 12th of June. Lidl to the London Borough of Bexley back on the 31st of May 2023. The Co-op to Manchester City Council on the 30th of January 2024. And Marks & Spencer to Birmingham City Council on the 25th of June 2024. Waitrose was added to the list in March 2025. Aldi and Iceland were not complained about because on the campaign's assessment they had not made the false claims. And here are the actual phrases that were challenged. Tesco, expertly baked in store since 1968, and baking fresh from our ovens every day. Sainsbury's, freshly made every day, and freshly baked in store every day. Asda, baked in store and freshly baked daily. Morrison's, baked fresh daily and baked right here. Lidl, our fresh in-store bakery, and baked for you throughout the day. The Co-op, freshly baked today and from oven to shelf. Marks & Spencer, oven baked in store today and baking now. Waitrose, baked in store today. Look at the verbs: baked, made, baking. Every one of them is a verb about creation, deployed to describe an act of reheating. And look at what two of them do with time, because these are the two I find most audacious. Expertly baked in store since 1968. That sentence borrows 50-odd years of continuity. It is asking you to picture a lineage, an unbroken chain of people baking bread in that building since before the decimal currency. It does not say that the same thing has been happening since 1968. It just puts the year next to the verb and lets your brain draw the line. And baking now, 2 words. Present continuous tense. The most immediate claim it is possible to make in the English language, printed on a fixed sign that says the same thing at 9 in the morning and 9 at night, above a counter where the actual baking happens somewhere else, possibly on a different continent, possibly before that sign was even printed. Neither of those is a lie about an oven. Both are a lie about a process. And here is the finding that puts the whole thing in perspective. Of the 10 largest chains, not one bakes everything from scratch across all of its stores. 7 of them make nothing from scratch in any location at all. The overwhelming majority of what sits on those counters is manufactured centrally and merely rebaked in store. Several products were found to be manufactured outside the United Kingdom without that being disclosed. Now, 30 seconds and then I will show you the part that isn't on the label at all. The Food Ledger UK is a new channel. Everything in this video came from trading standards, complaint records, campaign group investigations, government labelling guidance, published food regulations, and an independently conducted national survey. All of it public. Almost none of it read by anybody except the people it regulates. I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. Not 100,000, 5,000. That is the number where this becomes sustainable enough to keep doing properly. If the last few minutes have changed how you will walk past a bakery counter, press subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it is the difference between this continuing and this quietly stopping. 5,000. Now, what happened when the supermarkets were confronted? Some of them folded, and they folded fast. The Co-op undertook to stop using freshly baked today in September 2024. Sainsbury's dropped some of its fresh bread claims in October 2024. And Lidl went furthest. On the 1st of November 2024, the London Borough of Bexley, which holds what is called a primary authority relationship with Lidl, meaning it is the council formally responsible for advising them on compliance, confirmed that there were now no references to freshly baked anywhere in Lidl's in-store advertising materials or on their website. Read that sentence again because it is an admission dressed as an administrative note. A retailer did not remove that phrase from a single poster. It removed it from its entire estate and its entire website, following engagement with the authority responsible for its compliance. And then there is Asda, which produced the single most remarkable response in the whole file. In October 2024, Asda accepted that the claims were inaccurate and carried on using them. I want to sit on that for a moment because it tells you more about the enforcement landscape in this country than any amount of analysis. A major national retailer conceded that a marketing claim was inaccurate and continued to display it, and the practical consequence of that was, as far as the public record shows, very little. Most of these complaints remained unresolved a year after they were filed. That is not a story about dishonest bakers. That is a story about a regulatory system in which inaccurate is not by itself a thing that stops anything. There is one more finding from that investigation worth having, and it is the one nobody expects. Rebaking a product uses roughly twice as much energy as baking it once. And rebaked bread goes stale faster than genuinely fresh bread, which means more of it gets thrown away. So the bake-off model is not simply a marketing convenience. On the campaign's analysis, it is worse environmentally than baking properly, in both directions at once. Now I want you to do something, because I cannot photograph every bakery counter in Britain, and you can. Next time you're in a supermarket, go to the in-store bakery and read the signage. All of it. The overhead sign, the shelf-edge tickets, the paper bags, the little cards on the trays. Write down the exact wording. Then look for what is not there. Is there an ingredients list anywhere? Is there any indication of where the product was made? Is there a country of origin? Put what you find in the comments to the retailer, the exact phrase, and whether you could find an ingredients list. I read these properly, and material from the last 3 videos has ended up in my research notes. If enough of us do it, we will have a public record of exactly what these counters currently claim. And answer me one more thing, because I suspect it is nearly universal. Has the smell of a supermarket bakery ever made you buy bread you had not intended to buy? Be honest, it has worked on me more than once, and I knew all of this while it was happening. Right, now why is British bread like this in the first place? Because this did not start with supermarkets, and understanding where it came from explains everything that follows. In 1961, at a research facility in the Hertfordshire village of Chorleywood, 3 researchers at the British Baking Industries Research Association, Bill Collins, George Elton, and Norman Chamberlain, developed a new method of making bread. It is known to this day as the Chorleywood bread process, and it is arguably the most consequential thing that has ever happened to food in this country. The problem they were solving was real, and it was not sinister. Traditional bread making requires long fermentation, hours of it, during which the dough develops structure and flavour. It also works best with high-protein wheat, which Britain's climate is not brilliant at growing, meaning the country was heavily dependent on imported North American grain. What Chorleywood did was replace time with energy. Instead of letting the dough develop over hours, an extremely high-speed mixer works it for about 3 minutes, imparting so much mechanical energy that the gluten structure develops almost instantly. So much heat is generated that the mixers require cooling jackets or chilled water. Air pressure inside the mixer can be adjusted to control the size and number of the gas bubbles, which is to say the texture of the crumb is dialed in as a machine setting. Add an oxidizing agent, ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, plus fat and a higher dose of yeast, and you get a loaf that goes from flour to wrapped product in roughly 3.5 hours, with only around 45 to 50 minutes of proving. 3.5 hours. From nothing to a bagged loaf on a shelf. And it worked. It worked so completely that on figures from the last decade or so, around 80% of the bread made in the United Kingdom used this process. It spread to Australia, South Africa, South America, Turkey, and France. It made bread cheap, consistent, soft, and abundant, and it did that during a period when a lot of British people did not have much money. Anyone who dismisses it entirely is not being serious about what it achieved. But here is what it means for us. British bread was re-engineered 60-odd years ago around speed and mechanical intervention rather than time. Once that is your baseline, the technical infrastructure to freeze, ship, and finish a partially baked loaf 2 years later is not a departure from British bread making. It is the logical next step. Which brings me to the thing I told you to hold on to. Look at a wrapped supermarket loaf. There is an ingredients list: flour, water, yeast, salt, vegetable oils, and then a run of things you may or may not recognize: emulsifiers, preservatives, flour treatment agent. That list is not complete. And it is not incomplete because someone broke the law. It is incomplete because the law does not require completeness. The category is called processing aids. A processing aid is defined in essence as a substance used during manufacture to achieve a technological purpose, which is not consumed as a food in itself, and which may leave residues in the finished product, provided those residues present no health risk and have no technological effect on the finished food. And processing aids are exempt from ingredient labeling. Additives must be declared. Processing aids need not be. Now, what actually goes into bread under this heading? Overwhelmingly, enzymes. Industrial baking uses a suite of them, and they are not obscure. Fungal alpha amylase used to increase volume and keep the loaf soft for longer. Hemicellulase and xylanase used to improve volume and make the dough easier for machinery to handle. Multigenic amylase used to slow staling. L-cysteine, also used against staling, historically derived from sources including chicken feathers, though it can be produced synthetically. Transglutaminase, used to strengthen dough structure. None of those has to appear on the packet. You have almost certainly eaten every one of them repeatedly this year. And here is the part that made me go back and check I had read it correctly. The manufacturer decides, There is no public register of processing aids. There is no approval list you can look up the way you can look up an E-number. The classification of a given substance as a processing aid rather than an additive is a determination made by the manufacturer, applying the legal definition without any requirement to publish that determination or the reasoning behind it. The Federation of Bakers, the industry body, argues that processing aids are used up during manufacture and are therefore not present in the finished loaf in any meaningful sense. Critics, the Real Bread campaign among them, dispute that this has been comprehensively demonstrated for all substances in all products, and point to evidence that some enzyme residues, particularly in crusts, do persist after baking. Some of these enzymes are documented occupational allergens in the baking industry itself. I'm not going to tell you these substances are dangerous because I do not have the evidence to say that, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I will tell you flatly is this: there is a category of deliberately added substance in a large proportion of British bread that you cannot look up, cannot see on the label, and cannot avoid. And the decision about whether it belongs in that invisible category is made by the company adding it. That is the finding, not poison, opacity, and it gets one layer thinner still when the bread is not wrapped. For loose, unwrapped bread, the kind sold at exactly the counter we started with, the mandatory information is considerably lighter than for a packaged loaf. It comes down to the name of the product, any allergens present, and declarations about irradiation or genetic modification if relevant. It can be given on a label or simply on a notice near the product, such as a shelf-edge ticket. So the loaf you buy loose from the counter with the smell carries the least information of any bread in the shop. Now, the law does do some real work here, and I want to give it credit, because these rules are genuinely useful, and hardly anyone knows them. Under the bread and flour regulations, certain descriptions are reserved and mean specific things. Wholemeal means all of the flour used is wholemeal, not most of it, all of it. Wheat germ bread must contain at least 10% added wheat germ. Wheatmeal is not permitted as a description at all. And a brand name on its own is not sufficient. The product still needs a descriptive name telling you what kind of bread it is. That is a real checkable tool. If a loaf says wholemeal, that word has a legal meaning behind it. If it says brown, malted, granary style, rustic, farmhouse, artisan, or country, those words do not. The regulations also require that flour in this country is fortified. Iron, niacin, thiamine, and calcium must be added, including to imported flour. And from the 13th of December 2026, folic acid fortification becomes mandatory for non-wholemeal common wheat flour, a public health measure aimed at reducing neural tube defects in pregnancy, which is worth pausing on. The most industrialized, most processed, most mechanically intervened loaf in the shop is also a deliberate vehicle for public health nutrition. Both things are true. This subject does not resolve neatly, and I distrust anyone who tells you it does. Then there is sourdough. Sourdough is the most valuable word in the bakery aisle right now. Real sourdough is leavened by a live culture of wild yeasts and bacteria, fermented slowly, with no commercial baker's yeast and no additives. That long fermentation is the entire point. It is what produces the flav.